do you de-stress? After the day, do you open up a beer, maybe like sit down for some video games or watch some TV? I mean, maybe it's 4:20, maybe you're blazing it. But how many beers do you open? How many hours do you submerge yourself in video games? Do you have to smoke weed every day? How far does it have to go before it becomes an addiction? First off, okay, what is an addiction? My favorite definition to use is that it's any activity, substance, object, or behavior that has become the major focus of a person's life to the point of exclusion of other activities and social values. Addictions are a very dangerous road to go down, whether it be using a substance or just through a behavior. One of the common signs of an addiction is the person will become obsessed with it. They'll do anything they can to seek it out, even if it means throwing their money away, or some will even go as far as to harm others. They'll compulsively engage in it. Like, some days they might be like, you know what, I don't think I'm going to drink a beer today, and then they'll end up drinking too. They start to experience withdrawal symptoms, as if anxiety from not getting their fix, or irritation towards others. They'll have a loss of control, just going from, you know what, I'm only going to play like 1 hour of video games today, and then they end up, staying up the whole night. They'll start denying their problems. They'll start getting defensive. They'll say, no, I don't have a problem. And then they'll end up hiding their behavior from others in order to make themselves believe that they don't have a problem. Addictions are really dangerous because it can lead to dependency on the substance or behavior. If they can't get it, they'll experience the withdrawal symptoms, as mentioned before, all that irritation, all that anxiety, and just like on edge, maybe like shaking a lot if they don't get their cocaine. Most of all, addictions can physically change the brain, just like any other mental illness, say like depression or schizophrenia. We used to treat addictions as just a moral thing, but through research, after we discovered that it has to do with the neurotransmitters in the brain and all the receiving and sending messages and feelings and hormones, we can conclude that it definitely is a mental illness. If it's an addiction to a substance, their brain could possibly change, but their body will also definitely experience some bad symptoms too. The most common one is getting lung cancer from smoking cigarettes. Alcohol destroys the liver if used too much. The drug Molly destroys the liver after just like a few uses. Heroin and meth absolutely destroy your skin and just like completely reduce your body weight. And if you've ever heard of the hardcore like Russian drug called crocodile, it actually rots your flesh away. I'm not going to include any pictures on this because it's pretty gory, but they are pictures of the skin decaying away. You can see the inside of the flesh and you can see the actual bone, and they're like a living zombie. It's crazy. The actual psychology behind addiction. This is your brain, of course, and if you zoom in a little, there's a bunch of neurons and connections in the brain. Zoom in some more, and this is actually what the neurons look like. And between each neuron, there's the synapse, where you have a sender and a receiver, sending hormones to the receiver. The three chemicals in the brain that play the biggest role in addiction are serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And all these three are transmitters that give you a feeling of relaxation or happiness. It starts out as, if I drew this, if this is the receiver receiving the hormones, and here's some dopamine. Your brain naturally produces dopamine, and it naturally produces these neurotransmitters to make you feel happy. Well, let's say you've been smoking some weed, and some THC comes in there, and it starts fitting into the same places that dopamine would fit into. So it's almost as if the THC is like an artificial dopamine. Well, soon your brain says, oh, okay, if you're taking care of that, then I don't have to produce any more dopamine. But then what happens when you're not smoking any weed and your brain's not producing any more dopamine? It physically changes the brain, and it'll decrease some synapses. It'll like slow down transmitting time, and it's just overall detrimental to the brain. There are numerous types of different addictions. Starting out with substance, the most common one is caffeine. It is an upper to help, people wake up in the morning. A lot of people don't admit that they have caffeine addictions, and a lot of people just like to casually say like, oh yeah, it's totally an addiction. But they really should be treating this more seriously because of the withdrawal symptoms. Probably the second most common is nicotine, most commonly found in cigarettes and maybe chewing tobacco, depending on the company. This is the second most common because of the immediate relieval of stress that the user feels. There's also alcohol and all different kinds of liquor and beer. There's marijuana, of course. There are numerous other drugs, like an uncountable amount. I see like cocaine there, I see some meth, I see ecstasy, some Molly. Even prescription drugs people can get dependent on. Say like every single time they get like a slight headache, they might just like quickly run to the ibuprofen. But after a while, like their brain will become dependent on that, and if they run out of ibuprofen and they get this headache, then not only will their headache persist, but they'll start to feel just incredibly anxious, and the brain is so used to ibuprofen that it eventually makes the headache worse. There are many more behavioral kinds of addiction, the most common in the US being gambling. Gambling is one of the biggest wastes of money in the United States. It's ruining our economy pretty much because of all the money going down the drain, but there are entire towns dedicated to gambling, like, Las Vegas. So not only is it detrimental to someone's behavior, but gambling is an addiction that's detrimental to our country. There's also the adrenaline seekers. Once you do like something risky or, something that's like really exciting, you get this neurotransmitter called adrenaline. And you can become addicted to feeling that adrenaline. So you'll go off and you'll start doing crazier things. You'll start from like bungee jumping to cliff diving to skydiving, going into the zoo and wanting to pet a tiger and things like that. The internet is also a big one. That's more of a personal one for me because I spend all my time on the internet, just like going around Facebook, going around forums. There's also shopping. This is most common amongst women, of course. I know for me, I like to go thrifting because I like to have new things every once in a while, and I like to have a change. But you can tell it's an addiction if you end up blowing, thousands after thousands of dollars a year just by going out and getting useless things, just to give you like this sense of change and refresh. Video games are probably the second biggest behavioral addiction, and this is also a personal one for me because I had this, it was either a really good or a really bad game called Okami for the PS2, and after I got it, I would play it like 8 hours a day straight, and then after I was done, I would come out of that and like, my mom would be like, what do you want for dinner? And I'm like, what's dinner? I just was so completely immersed in that game that, takes place in, feudal Japan, so it's not like this world, that I started thinking like all the NPCs in that game. There's also work. Work does not look like an addiction because people say, oh, that's not bad, I mean, he's going back, he's working overtime, and he's gonna like go get money for his family. But if work is becoming his escape from family, and every single time you know, a husband or a wife may get into a fight with their spouse or their children, they'll just be like, you know what, I don't care, I'm going back to work, I'm gonna go work, and I'm just getting away from here. So, if it's leading to their destruction of their family, that's a pretty good sign of an addiction. Magic the Gathering is also a big one in my group of friends, because every single one of my friends like to play this game, and you can get booster packs of cards, which I think are $5 for a pack, but one of my friends admits even skipping meals, like he'll have like $5 and he'll be like, okay, I could go get a meal today, or I could go get like a booster pack of Magic cards, and then he'll be like, wow, this is just like a heroin addiction, but he doesn't stop, and he's wasting all of his money on this game. There's also eating, of course. Eating comfort food, as they call it, will release an immense amount of serotonin, which is one of the 3 main neurotransmitters for happiness. But if you eat too much or become too dependent on that food, your brain will stop, making serotonin from doing other activities, and it will only focus on making serotonin when you eat. So you just keep on eating and eating. It also will, of course, lead to severe weight gain, maybe heart disease, or clogging up the arteries, maybe strokes and heart attacks. And then there's also an addiction to sex and watching porn, simply because of the rush of hormones that people can get addicted to. Really common myths are, one being, overcoming addiction is simply a matter of willpower. It is not a simple matter of willpower. You can't just be depressed and say, you know what, I'm just going to get over depression. Yeah, that sounds fine. You can't have schizophrenia and be like, you know what, I'm bored of this. I'm going to, just get out of it. Addictions are a mental illness. They physically change the brain and all their pathways. The opposite myth of that is that addiction is a disease and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, depression, you can do something about depression. You can go to counselors, just like you can with addiction. You can get medicine to get off of addictions. I know for, getting off of cigarettes, there are nicotine patches to help replace and get off the cigarettes. Addicts do not have to hit rock bottom before they can get better. You don't need some traumatic experience to, decide that you need to quit. Recovery can happen at any point of the addiction. I'm not arguing that even looking at a drug or even doing just a minor behavior is bad for you. I mean, if you need a cigarette or like some weed or some video games to help you get through a tough week, then you can do that. You can be my guest. I only ask that you do not become too dependent on whatever you choose. There's a big difference between stress relievers and hobbies versus an addiction. Addictions are chronic, addictions are progressive, and addictions can be fatal. Overall, addictions are dangerous. Thank you for listening.